Do you remember the moment in your childhood when Transformers stopped being cool? Now, hold on. I'm not saying Transformers aren't cool. As adults, I'm assuming you're watching this channel because you think Transformers are very cool. And yet, there's a time I can specifically recall in 1985 where Transformers ceased to be cool. And it's not because anything was wrong with them. It's because something even better came along. And its name was Voltron. Ho, 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 ho. In 1985, this rocked my world and the world of my friends. He'd been around before that, even in the United States, and we'd missed him entirely. But now he had a cartoon and his own toy line, and holy gosh, everybody wanted him. Keep in mind, too, as children of the 80s, we'd never seen super robots before. If you grew up in the 70s, this was the normal thing, and it was these new transforming robot toys that turned into regular vehicles that were way more cool. But if you started with Transformers, this giant guy, oh my gosh, he was everything. So here's the crazy and problematic part is, let's say you love Voltron today, and you should. Let's say Voltron is one of your absolute favorites, and you have one in your toy shelf, and he is the center of your collection. There's this thing we do as collectors. Something makes us happy, and we go, how can I get more of that? It's not enough. I want more. And if you love Voltron and you went and tried to get more, what you ended up with was Voltron 1 and Voltron 2, which came from totally different Japanese animes, which don't feel like Voltron 3 in the slightest. The design, the engineering, the materials feel completely and totally different. So, a lot of us Voltron fans just went through adulthood thinking, there's nothing else out there quite like it. Except that there is. Before I tell you about Voltron's spiritual ancestor, a toy just like him in so many ways, and in some ways even superior, we have to do a little crash course history in where giant combining robot toys come from. So, picture that it's 1954, and our story begins with Godzilla. You heard me right, Godzilla, who is not a robot, who is not a combiner, who is not even an anime. He's a giant radioactive lizard. But Godzilla captured Japan's attention, and not just because he was larger than life, it was also because he represented something horrific. He was a symbol representing the horrors of the atomic bomb, two of which had been dropped on Japan only a decade earlier, and those memories were still fresh. Japan at the time was still a largely agrarian society, slowly adapting to the modern world. And suddenly there was this larger-than-life destructive technology that had no morals, it had no beliefs, it had no rationale, it had no logic. It just did what it did. And that was terrifying for Japan. It's not a coincidence that only 2 years later, Japan's first super robot launches. It was a manga first, and that's Tetsujin 28, known in the States as Gigantor. And Gigantor is a large, giant robot. Not the first robot in Japan, but the first enormous one, Godzilla-sized. But here's the key. Not only is he a good guy, but the reason he's able to be a good guy is because he has no will of his own. He is controlled by remote control by a young boy. He has no will. He has no desires. He is controlled by our sense of right and wrong, and that makes him a good guy. So, Tetsujin 28 is a huge deal, but he's not as big as Astro Boy or Mighty Atom in Japan, who'd arrived 4 years earlier and had a ton of imitators. Mighty Atom is not really in any way relevant to this conversation, except for the fact that he's why Gigantor doesn't spawn really an entire revolution. Everyone's still trying to make Mighty Atom ripoffs, not Gigantor ripoffs for the most part. It's not until 1974, over a decade later, that Go Nagai creates Mazinger Z. And Mazinger Z is his attempt to replicate the joy and wonder of Tetsujin 28, which he'd grown up with. Except that Mazinger Z is way cooler looking, way more sophisticated, and has way more appeal, and Mazinger Z launches an entire revolution of 1970s Japanese robot toys. And again, this is really important. Mazinger Z has no free will of his own. It is a pilot in a plane who flies into the head of Mazinger Z and then is able to operate and pilot him. Once again, it's a safe good guy because it has no will of its own. For those of us who grew up with Transformers, who are just sentient. We totally missed the point of that, but these robot heroes didn't have their own will. Mazinger Z does really, really well and creates tons of imitators out there, and all these super robots are popping up left and right, and Popey is manufacturing these really cool robot toys at 2 different size scales. You can get the 5.5-inch ones. You can get the 2-foot tall giant vinyl ones made of shampoo bottle material. It's really a whole exciting revolution. And then Toei, the company producing Mazinger Z, needs a new hit. And they realize it's time to do something a little different. All these robot toys are becoming kind of interchangeable and forgettable. And they've got competitors nipping at their heels. They got to do something different. And they come up with the idea for something that might make for better storytelling. What if instead of one pilot operating this giant robot, you had 3? Okay, great idea. How do you get the 3 into the one robot? Do they have 3 different jets, and one goes in the head, and one goes in the mouth, and one goes in the... Yeah, no, let's not continue that thought. Instead, they come up with this idea, and I'm sure they didn't actually sound like this, but in my own headcanon, it went a little bit like this dawning realization. Whoa. What if they were the robot? And so we get Get-A-Robo, where instead of 3 different vehicles joining into a robot somewhere, like connecting with it, the vehicles become the robot. There is no giant robot just sitting out there somewhere that they have to go to in an emergency and then bring back to the battlefield. Their vehicles join together and create Get-A-Robo in one of 3 different combinations. It's the first combiner toy in Japan, except that it's not. You see, kids go crazy, and they run out to buy this toy, and they come home with it, and it doesn't do anything. I don't know whether Popey missed the message or Toei didn't think it was important, but the Get-A-Robo toys didn't do what the cartoon did. It was just another giant robot. So, Toei gets the message. I don't know if they polled their fans or got hate mail or had mobs of angry kids descending upon the company headquarters, but they start releasing robot toys that actually do stuff. We get Raideen, who I've talked about in the previous video of the Spider-Man plus Japan equals awesome. Raideen has a very primitive transformation from robot to jet. You've got Deimos or however you... I am not great with the Japanese names, guys, but I'm trying. Deimos or Deimos or whatever, who converts from a robot to a truck. And then finally, we get Combatler V. And Combatler V is the first true combiner robot toy. It's some primitive vehicles that through a pretty simplistic, but for the time, advanced transformation or combination, becomes one large robot. Combatler V was a huge deal, and Toei said, we got to keep doing that, let's do it even better. And the next year they released Volts 5, which is basically Combatler, only way better. It's bigger, it's more beautiful, it's a more complex transformation, it's a masterpiece. Where do you go from there? What do you do next? You've got these competitors who are trying to keep up, who are producing these robot animes left and right, and their toys are getting better. Where do you take this next? You can't just keep making the same thing. And so they come up with this strange idea. An idea that we still aren't really comfortable with or used to in America, but really took off in Japan. Which is, what's cooler than a giant space vehicle that shoots lasers and forms into a larger robot? How about a giant space vehicle that fires lasers and has claws and teeth and roars and turns into a larger robot? So we get Daltanious. And Daltanious is essentially a combiner that instead of being 3 vehicles, it's one space-age vehicle, one robot, and a giant frickin' lion. Daltanious is essentially the godfather of Beast Combiner toys, and it was released a year before the toy known as Beast King Go Lion, which became Voltron in the United States. There is a lot of similarity between the two. Engineering-wise, they are very similar toys, almost identical in some respects and very different in others. And while you can argue that Voltron is better in some respects, Daltanious is way superior in others. So let's take a look at Daltanious today and learn a little bit more about Voltron's spiritual father/brother. Let's start with the obvious. Let's start with the guy who looks a lot like what we already know. There we have Valerios. At least that's his name in the Godican version. I'm not sure if that's his name in the original. And Valerios looks very similar to some lions you already know. Let's do a little comparison here. Someone out there is like, what's Voltron? You're watching the wrong channel then. But here's the better known yellow lion. Let's put the two near each other. Now, this is the one we're more used to. It's got more of an 80s cyber look to it. It's a much cooler toy in many respects. But first of all, notice a couple things. Number one, you see how almost identical those leg designs are? They move almost exactly the same. In fact, the only difference with this one here is you have to actually pull it out to rotate. But they tuck away in the exact same way. It is the same thing. That one doesn't really need to. But yeah, it's very, very similar. And then the lion tail, this one's a little more primitive, but it's the same idea. The way it's tucked in the back there. And here's the thing, too. A lot of people's favorite thing about these lions is the hidden weapons it's got, right? Well, Daltanious might be a little more primitive, but he's got one, too. First of all, he can shoot a missile out of his mouth that I no longer have, but how cool is that? But also, on top of that, you can rotate his head forward and lift out another missile launcher. Pretty cool, right? So far, maybe he doesn't look as awesome, although I have to ask this too, and I gotta wonder this. Did kids of the 1980s understand that this is a male lion and these are female lions? Don't get me wrong, I'm into the whole female empowerment business, but I wonder if kids actually understood that. Not that it's a drawback, it's just interesting to me. I always thought these guys looked more like, I don't know, like panthers or jaguars than actual lions. That's a lion. That's clearly a lion. This, I'll take your word on it. All right, so there's that aspect of it. Let me introduce you to the other pieces and show you how the whole thing goes together. So, this part I really love. It's such a 1980s spaceship. This is Gunper. Gunper! Oops, let's fix that. That looks a little janky the way it was. That's Gunper. He's an interesting toy. Like the other piece, he does have hidden stuff that comes out. I don't quite know why you need these, but, you know, they're there. He can shoot missiles out of this. And, yeah, he's a spaceship because, you know, looks like the kind of vehicle that you'd expect your heroes to actually use in going into a combat and then turning into a giant robot afterwards. I really like Gunper. It's just so 80s and so cute. Then we've got Atlas. And Atlas is a very unique idea in that he is just a robot. And a pretty cool one. You know, in a time where robots were so blocky and rigid, look at these poses his legs can do. Like, he's got some flexibility. Atlas can do yoga. Atlas can dance. It's a pretty cool toy. And the idea that a smaller robot can join with some stuff to create a bigger robot was a new idea with Daltanious as well. It's the transformation that's really fun, though. So let me show you how that goes. So we're going to begin with Gunper. Gunper! In Gunper, we're going to shove these little things in here. They'll go away. And by the way, one of my favorite things about Gunper is you press the button, they shoot back out again. I think that's just awesome. I can't get enough of that feature. It's such a minor detail, but it's so much fun to me. I don't know. Anyway, these will go away. By the way, FYI, if you don't already know this, I should bring this up in my videos all the time. For some reason, the chemical composition of blue plastic in the 1970s, 1980s was really, really, really volatile and breaks down easily. It is very hard to find. If you know Voltron 2, the Abegas robots, you'll notice the blue one is very hard to find because the blue plastic breaks down. And you'll even notice on my thing here, I did glue that piece back on because it broke my first day. So this is something to look out for if you're ever going to buy Daltanious. The blue plastic right here, it's in a tense area. It holds a lot of weight. It's very prone to breakage, so you want to check for that. But anyway, we'll remove this little joiner piece here. That was holding together the two sides. We'll make some clear feet, push in the wing, which, by the way, ejects out again later on. I love that. Oops. How about I treat my toys nicely and not have them falling over left and right? These are going to fall over again until I do something with them. So let's bring out our lion, Valerios. And Valerios is going to feel very, very Voltron. Very, very Voltron in how it does this. This is going to feel like you've been there and done this before. Now, don't get me wrong. The black lion from Voltron has a sweet transformation. This is not even close. But there are aspects of this that are very similar. That wasn't one of them. Watch this, though. Watch how the legs go in. Where have you seen that before? Oh my gosh. Releases the same way. It's the exact same transformation. Da 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 da. You've seen this before. It's Voltron. This guy was 1 year earlier, same company. This is where they got the idea. The next part we'll have to tilt up a little bit. This toy is about to get bigger. And I want to be very, very clear. The finished product Daltanious is not as cool looking as Beast King Go Lion, otherwise known as Voltron 3. It's not. But it's awfully close. And if you're needing more Voltron in your life, this is the way to go to get it. So we're going to remove this for a second. He's actually really clever. I really like how this goes. Watch this. We're going to pull out his chest. And then we're going to fold his legs into his chest to create more surface area so he's more buff. Talk about total transformation. I mention a lot of my videos. He really is altering his very mass to look completely different. You still know it's the same toy, but it gives the illusion of being something much more significant, something weightier. Now here's a cheat that Voltron 1 doesn't do, or Voltron 3 doesn't do. You do have to add on bigger fists for him. And I'm going to admit right here, I only have one of the two bigger fists. That's, I got mine a little bit cheap because it was missing a fist. There's supposed to be two. Then he gets a little crown to show that he's now bigger. That's a mainstay you'll see in the Brave line later on. Just a way of indicating he is more powerful now. And then we'll give him back his sword. He has a better weapon that he would have if I had the right fist. We'll use the little weapon again. And a shield. And that's Daltanious. Look, he's not Voltron 3. But he's a good-looking toy. And he's a lot of fun to transform. And he has a similar heft, a similar design to Voltron 3. He feels like he's from the same family. Whereas Voltron 1, Die Rigger 15, and Voltron 2, Abega does not. He's got that to him. So if you love your Voltrons, you really need to check out Daltanious. In the end, these are both amazing toys. It's not even an issue of which one is better and which one is worse. Voltron is the better looking robot / Go Lion, Beast King, Go Lion, thingy, whatever. And in giant robot form, he's way more impressive. But Daltanious has some really outstanding qualities as well. Whereas Voltron is really just the black lion and then a bunch of smaller lions that all do pretty much the same thing. You know, crumple their legs together and tilt ahead. Daltanious has some really original transformations going on in there. At any rate, the point being, if you love Voltron, you've been looking for a toy that feels a little more like him, here is his spiritual brother / father. This is the one you really want to check out. And the beauty is, Daltanious, for whatever reason, doesn't sell for a ton of money these days. He's not cheap, but he won't cost you much more than a Voltron would. In fact, sometimes you can find him for a little bit less. By me getting one with one missing arm, one little derpy hand, he was a lot cheaper. But the point being, he's a beautiful toy, and he's really worth checking out. And hey, I intend to do more videos about them eventually. But you've got to check out this entire Godaikin line. Bandai bringing the surplus of some of their best, combining and transforming robot toys from Japan to the United States. There was no cartoon, there were no commercials, or not many commercials, and kids like me missed out on it. But it's a great toy line, and because it was here in the United States briefly, it's not that hard to get a hold of. Daltanious is a part of that, and there's so many other great ones out there as well. Man, I'd spend more time in that series, but I've got other stuff waiting to show you next. Next episode will probably be about... I can't do that. Check in soon. In the meantime, please hit like and subscribe. You have no idea how much it helps our channel. Check out our other videos and playlists. And if you want to talk more about all things nerdy and geeky, from classic comic books to toys to video games to movies, classiccomics.org is where you're going to want to find us. It's much more meaningful than the exchanges you have in the comments here. It's much more meaningful and much more connected than a Facebook group. Go to a place where people actually want to get to know you, where there's a lot going on, and you're never going to want to leave. We're not Olive Garden, but once you're there, you're family. ClassicComics.org. And I'll see you next time. Have a great one. Stay weird.